What's up guys, Asian here with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Nightblade DPS. So, I've mentioned this a couple of times already in previous build videos, but not much has changed between Dragonhold and Harrowstorm. A couple of sets were released, but none of them are really strong enough to really replace any of the old meta sets from Dragonhold. So builds, DPS builds, and tank builds, and healer builds across the board are very similar in Harrowstorm as they were in Dragonhold. So don't expect that many changes. This video is actually going to be very similar to, if not identical to, the build video that I released last patch in Dragonhold, with a few minor tweaks here and there. So just like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going over any sort of gear. That is reserved for the Stamina DPS gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear I am running, go ahead and check out that video and then come back here. This video will be discussing the skill bars as well as the rotation itself. So let's go ahead and get started here first with our skills. So we're going to start off first with our dual wield bar, which is our front bar. We have Killer's Blade as our execute ability. You have Surprise Attack. Now you can use a different spamble if you prefer. So the other spamble of choice would be Rapid Strikes under the dual wield line. It's up to you which one you want to run. I personally had a little bit better luck with Surprise Attack, mainly because I just found it a little bit easier to weave compared to Rapid Strikes, but in theory Rapid Strikes is going to be the stronger spammable. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to run. One of the advantages of running Surprise Attack is that it does reduce physical resistance of anything you hit while you are flanking them for 10 seconds, which can be beneficial in group content. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to run. Surprise Attack gives a little bit of group utility. Obviously, you are giving up a little bit of personal DPS, but it's kind of up to you, again, which spamble you want to run. Now this spot here is a flex spot. I have Darkshade right now. Darkshade, while it does deal magic damage, scales with our highest offensive stats, so in this case weapon damage and max stamina. So even though it does deal magic damage and as such is not affected by as many CPs, it's only affected by our Mastered Arm CP, it's still fairly strong because it scales off of our weapon damage and max stamina. But you can swap this out with a different ability if you so desire. And we'll go over a couple of the options in a little bit. Then we have Relentless Focus. This is our bow proc, very important and very powerful part of our toolkit here. Then we have Barbed Trap for minor force. Our ultimate is Incapacitating Strike. Now we are double barring Incapacitating Strike mainly because of the cast time. So you can't cast Incapacitating Strike on the back bar and then bar swap cancel out the animation because of that cast time. So we have it double barred. It also gives us the Reeve as passive, which gives us magic and stamina back whenever we deal damage with a light or heavy attack when we attack an enemy that has a negative effect on them. Pretty much that's always going to be active in a trial scenario because Taunt and Minor Maim from Heroic Slash are likely to be always up on the boss, so you'll always be getting that additional magic and stamina back on a light attack. So really great sustain tool here. Anyway, on to our back bar, we have Consuming Trap. This is sort of a flex spot here. You can replace this with something like Darkshade or any other ability that I'll mention in a few seconds here. Poison Injection, Endless Hail. We are running the Maelstrom bow, so we are using Endless Hail. You can also run Arrow Barrage if you intend on using the Master's bow, but it's up to you which one morph you want to run. But Endless Hail is the one you want to run if you're running the Maelstrom staff. A Maelstrom bow, I should say. Then we have Leeching Strikes for some sustain. You don't really need this too much, mainly because we have two abilities that use Magicka. So our sustain is actually pretty nice when you combine it with the Reeve. So you might not necessarily need Leeching Strikes. If you don't need it, then you can replace it with any one of the flex abilities that I'll mention in a few seconds. Then we have Barb Trapped again. This is just for the Fighter's Guild passive. So you could realistically just replace this with any Fighter's Guild ability you'd want, because we're only having this here for the additional weapon damage we get from the Fighter's Guild passive. Now in terms of alternative abilities that you might want to consider slotting on those few flex spots, if you need some additional mitigation through Major Evasion, you can run Mirage or Phantasmal Escape, kind of up to you which one you want. So Mirage gives you Minor Resolve, which gives you a little bit more resistances, but Phantasmal Escape removes snares and mobilizations. So they're both potentially useful. If you PvP a lot, you're obviously going to want to run Phantasmal Escape instead of Mirage. For PvE, Mirage might be a little bit better because you do get some additional resistances, and snares and mobilizations, you don't really see them too often in PvE. So that is one option there. Under the Shadowline, not much here to really talk about. So Dark Cloak does scale off of your max health, so it's not particularly strong as a self-heal. You do get the minor protection though while you are healing, so it is a little bit of an incentive to run Dark Cloak, but it's still fairly weak self-heal compared to something like Vigor. Then under the siphoning line, not much here to talk about except for power extraction, which might be useful as a spammable in trash fights because it is an AoE spammable. It also reduces weapon and spell damage of every enemy hit by a certain amount, 185 here, where power extraction 1. So could be useful in trash fights. It's kind of up to you whether you want to run this in trash fights or not, in place of something like surprise attack, rapid strikes, or just in place of one of the other flex spots that I mentioned earlier. In terms of the dual wield line, not much here. You can run Deadly Cloak for major evasion and damage. This would obviously be only on the front bar here because it is a dual wield ability. You can also run Rending Slashes or Blood Craze for additional bleed. Blood Craze will give you a little bit of a heal. Rending Slashes is a little bit stronger for the initial hits, but they're both pretty much similar in DPS, so you can really pick whichever one you want. Evasion, both morphs gives you major evasion. At this point, you have a lot of sources of major evasion, and you're better off, instead of running evasion, you're better off running Phantasmal Escape or Mirage, because that uses magicka, while evasion uses stamina. Any of the Fighter's Guild line is an appropriate option in case you just want just raw weapon damage. So Silver Shards is great for AoE damage. Ring of Preservation is the morph I would choose because it gives you a heal and minor protection, so really nice to have there as sort of like a quasi-emergency heal. Camouflaged Hunter would be the morph I choose here because while you're flanking somebody, if you do critical damage, you get minor berserk, so really great option here, particularly if you are fighting something where you're not being able to get minor berserk from a healer. So there are certain fights, like if you are the downstairs group for Navinta's hard mode, where you won't get minor berserk from a healer, so that's where Camouflaged Hunter would really come in handy. Then under the Undaunted line, Shadow Silk for the Black Widow synergy is always an option to run. The Black Widow synergy is not as strong as it used to be, but it's still essentially free damage because it is just a synergy, so why not use it to help out your fellow DPS? Then under the Alliance War, Vigor is going to be your most potent self-heal. So I always recommend running Echoing Vigor because it does stack with other sources of Echoing Vigor. So if you have 2 or 3 of them all stacked together, that actually ends up being a stronger heal compared to resolving Vigor. So I always recommend just running Echoing Vigor. It also just heals other people, which is always beneficial to have on hand. And that pretty much covers all the skills. Let's go ahead and talk about the rotation. So rotation here is fairly dynamic. It's really centered around this bow proc. So after 5 light attacks, you're able to use the bow proc Assassin's Scourge. It deals a fair amount of damage, so you definitely want to make sure to get it off as often as you can. And so basically your dots are going to center around the bow proc. So basically you just want to make sure you're pre-buffing with whatever you're running. Let me see if I can get something to happen here. Okay, looks like I can. So you want the bow proc, go off, and then go back, finish your back bar rotation. So you might need to break your back bar rotation here and there to get the bow proc off. Then beyond that, it's just making sure to keep an eye on our dots. That's pretty much the entirety of the rotation. It's really just centered around keeping an eye on your dots and using a bow proc as soon as it comes up. Now, we do want to cover how to appropriately use your bow proc. So let's first re-up it so we have the full 60 seconds. Now, something that I see very often for newer players is something that looks like this. I'll do it slowly so you guys can see what I'm doing. So you see something like this. So you can see here we did 5 light attacks and then we got a bow proc, but after the 5th light attack we used an ability, and then we did a 6th light attack and then the bow proc. That's something you want to avoid because that 6th light attack won't count for the 2nd bow proc, so the next bow proc after the first one, it's not going to count towards it. You can't infinitely stack light attacks just to fire off bow procs repeatedly. So right when you hit the 5th light attack, you want to use a bow proc rather than an ability. So rather than what I just showed you, this is what you want to have instead. So again, slowly so you guys can see what's happening. So here you're going to want to do light attack bow proc. So the previous one looks something like this instead. So this is the wrong way to do it. Light attack ability, light attack bow proc. So you're basically wasting one of your bow procs here. This is the proper way to do it. So you do light attack bow proc for the 5th one instead. So make sure to do that. That way you're not wasting any light attacks onto the next bow proc. It's very important to get as many bow procs as you can while the buff is up. So you should be able to get anywhere between 11 to 12 bow procs going on a given cast of Relentless Focus. Once you get into execute range, you're going to drop all your dots except for Endless Hail and Poison Injection, and just use Killer's Blade. So you will be dropping Dark Shade, Consuming Trap if you're running them. You are going to want to maintain Barbed Trap, and you will not be using any more bow procs once you're in execute, because your execute's going to end up doing more damage than your bow proc will. So let's go ahead and do a 21 million W Parse so you guys get an idea of how much DPS a Stamina Nightblade is able to pull compared to other classes. As always, a 21 million W Parse is not indicative or should be used as a proxy for in-raid parses. In an actual raid environment, you will have different debuffs and you will have more support. So you are currently missing things like Martial Knowledge, Zens, and Major Vulnerability, and you're missing a couple of sustain options like Symphony of Blades, Master of Restoration Staff, and so on. So your actual in-raid performance, your in-raid DPS, is going to differ from what you see on a 21 million dummy. The dummy parse here is just to give an accurate point of comparison across the different classes in the game. So don't use this as a proxy for in-raid performance. Now that we've said that, let's go ahead and get started. So I am using Maarselok, so I am going to be bashing here and there. That's one advantage of running Surprise Attack too, versus Rapid Strikes. Because Rapid Strikes is a channel, you're going to have to wait for the challenge to run completely out before you bash. So here's the breaking your back rotation. But because Surprise Attack is an instant cast, we're able to bash without really no issues at all. The one thing you might see me doing here and there is actually be sitting on my potions, and I'll explain that why I'm doing that. So remember, as a Nightblade, every time you drink a potion, you get 20 ultimate. So there exists a possibility that your ultimate's going to be very close to coming up, before you get a potion off. I don't know if it's going to happen. It might happen here. It didn't really happen here. But let's say my ultimate was, let's say I was at about 50 ultimate or 60 ultimate when my potion's off cooldown. It might be better for me to wait on that potion, get my ultimate off, so that way I get the 20 ultimate to count towards my next ultimate cast rather than that ultimate cast. That does require you to pay very close attention to your ultimate counter, which is obviously quite challenging to do. So it's not something that a lot of people do. You really have to micromanage and be very aware of things if you want to do that route. You can see just how good our sustain is, even though we're not using our siphoning attacks at all. We're getting into execute range here, so we're going to drop Consuming Trap, drop our Bow Proc, drop Dark Shade, keep up Rearming Trap, or I should say Barbed Trap, Endless Hail, and Poison Injection. Which we'll also probably keep bashing for Maarselok. So there we go, that is the Stamina Nightblade Parse there. We pulled just over 83.5k, so fairly respectable here. Still not quite as strong as Stamina Necromancers. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the Stamina rankings really haven't changed too much between Dragonhold and Harrowstorm, so Stamina Nightblades are kind of in the middle of the pack right now, kind of towards the higher half rather than the lower half of DPS. There's only 6 classes, so you can kind of guesstimate from there. But Stamina Necromancers are still pulling ahead, mainly because of the presence of major vulnerability here. But Nightblades are still fairly strong. One of the challenges of Nightblade is learning the rotation and learning how to master the bow proc rotation. So I personally find Nightblades to be very engaging. They're a lot of fun to play. But if you're looking to max out your DPS, Necromancers are obviously the way to go. But Nightblades are still capable of pulling very high levels of DPS, and you can find them in endgame content, clearing some of the hardest content in the game. That concludes this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.